Na 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 na. Na 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 na. All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. If you're new to this podcast, my name is Kayla Glaze. I'm a singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, music producer, and music mixer in Nashville, Tennessee. If you haven't heard the intro episode for what this podcast is about, I encourage you to go listen to episode 1. It's pretty short. Whether you're a new listener or you've been listening to this podcast, I really encourage you to listen to these episodes in order, because let's just say you were to sit down with me and ask me what advice I would give you when it comes to pursuing your dreams. The way that I'm actually laying out each of these episodes is in order for the step-by-step advice that I would give to you. Okay, so let's hop into episode 4. This episode is all about how I started a podcast in 2 weeks. So I've had some people reach out to me and say, Kayla, I didn't even know that you were wanting to start a podcast. And no one really knew, because I literally, from idea to making this podcast a reality, made this happen in 2 weeks. And when I said that to some friends, I've literally had some of them be like, how did you do that? Like, you literally got this idea and then 2 weeks later you're doing it. How did you do that? So I figured I'd share in a podcast episode how I started this podcast so quickly, because before starting this podcast, I had never done a podcast before. So I feel like talking about this is actually a really great example to give some step-by-step advice practically for how I did this. And maybe you're sitting there and you're like, but Kayla, I don't want to start a podcast, so why does this matter? This matters because the way that I did this actually applies to the way I've done a lot of other things. It's the same exact way that I became a music producer and music mixer in 8 months. And so what I'm going to share in this episode actually applies to whatever dream you're trying to pursue. And there's something out of this episode that I know that you can take to put to work to actually make your dream become a reality in your life. The things that I'm going to talk about today literally can be applied to any dream that any of you are trying to pursue. No matter what dream I'm pursuing, whether it's starting a podcast or pursuing something with music and going after a specific goal in music that I want to achieve, the steps that I take to get there typically look the same. And so that's why I'm going to be talking about all of this in today's episode. All right, so let's get into this. How did I start a podcast in 2 weeks? So, like I said, I had no experience doing a podcast. I've never done a podcast before. And when it comes to something I've never done before, the first thing that I always ask myself is, who do I know around me who's already doing this? Who do I know who already has experience with this that I can simply reach out to and gain knowledge from? And so I just started to think of who I knew that was doing a podcast. And the first people that came to my mind were actually a married couple that I went to ministry school with, that I saw were posting some clips on their Instagram of a podcast that they had started together. And so I was like, okay, these people know what they're doing. They're already doing it, which means they know the type of equipment to use. They know what website to go through for getting the podcast uploaded and distributed to Apple Music and Spotify and the listening platforms where you can listen to podcasts, because I had no idea what website to go through to do that or how to get the podcast audio distributed to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all these places. But I saw them doing it. So I was like, clearly they know what they're doing. They're already doing it. So I need to reach out to them and actually ask them questions to find out those things that I don't know so that I can get started. So I just went ahead and sent one of them a message on Instagram. And mind you, I had not talked to either one of these people in years. So I know it can feel vulnerable to reach out to someone that maybe you've never talked to before, or maybe you haven't talked to them in years. But something that I have found that I have had to start believing and kind of change my perspective about is people actually do want to help other people. I know for myself as a music producer, a music mixer, a songwriter, a singer, a musician, I have a huge heart to help other artists forward, because I had people along the way who helped me forward into those those things. And I know it can feel intimidating to approach people and to ask them those types of questions. Maybe you feel like they're not going to want to help me. They're too busy. They don't have the time for me. They're not going to think I'm worth helping. All of those things are lies. And something I just had to choose to start believing was that if I reached out and I put myself out there, and if I want to help other people forward, then there's a very high chance that if I reach out and I put myself out there, that that person actually will want to help me and won't mind. And here's the deal. If someone really is rude to you and just doesn't give you the time of day and treats you like crap because you simply wanted to ask them a question, I mean, just move on, find someone else. Something that also really helped me to overcome that hurdle of feeling like it was intimidating to ask people questions was changing my mindset and realizing, oh, me asking someone a question is actually me acknowledging the value that they hold. It's actually me honoring that person because I'm coming to them and I'm saying, hey, you're really great at this. Like, you're a pro at this. You have more experience than I have in this area. And I'm honoring you because of that and coming to you from a place of humility to ask you for help. And I think that's really cool. Like, when people reach out to me and they ask me questions about music production, I feel really honored because I'm like, wow, this person views me as a professional, and that's really cool to feel that from someone else, that they want to reach out to you to ask you for knowledge. And so for me, I actually feel like reaching out and asking people questions like that is taking a stance of like, hey, I'm honoring you. And honestly, I don't see why anyone would feel offended at that. If they do, they're just not the right person for you to talk to. Just let it go and move on. So that's the first thing that I want to encourage you to do is ask yourself, who do I know that's actually a pro at this or is actually better at this than I am, has more experience with this than I do, that I can reach out to and ask questions? Because honestly, it's way better and kind of like a fast track to reach out to someone who already has the experience in it than to try to figure it out on your own. It's going to take you a lot longer to figure it out if you try to do it by yourself. And that's just the cold-hearted truth. So that's what I did. I reached out to this couple. Actually, I reached out to the wife and I just said, hey, I know this is so random. I haven't talked to you in years, but I saw that you guys started a podcast and I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And I was just wondering what type of equipment you guys use and was also wondering what website you go through to get your podcast episodes uploaded and distributed to Apple Podcasts and Spotify, etc. Now, I am a music producer and music mixer, so I obviously already have a lot of my own equipment. So I didn't actually have to purchase equipment to start this podcast. But even if I didn't have this equipment, the first thing I would do is ask someone who's already doing it, like I did, what equipment did you use? Or you can also just go to Amazon and literally search podcast equipment. And multiple options will pull up that you can then look through, read the reviews, and choose from, depending on your budget. The next thing that I realized was that I was going to need some sort of cover art for my podcast. So I went to an app that I use all the time called Fiverr, and it's spelled Fiverr. Fiverr is an app that you can download onto your phone that you can go into and you can search for anything that you might want to hire someone for. So I literally opened up Fiverr and I searched podcast artwork and all these people popped up and I just went through and I looked through the different people in the artwork until I found one that I really liked. And then I hired that person to make my artwork for me. So depending on what you're doing, if you need any type of graphics or anything like that, I would really encourage you to download Fiverr. It's a great place to hire people to do things like that for you. There are so many people on there offering a huge variety of services. Even with podcasting, I could probably go on there and search podcast editor and people would probably pop up that I could actually send my audio to have them edit for me. Obviously, I do that myself because I produce and mix music, so it's really easy for me, but let's say you're wanting to start a podcast and you don't know how to do that stuff and you don't really want to spend the time doing it. You could go on there and hire people to do that for you as well. So I would definitely encourage you to do that if maybe you're wanting to pursue something where you would need graphics or anything like that. So yeah, I went to Fiverr. I hired someone to make the podcast artwork for me because I knew, okay, I can't post this podcast unless I have some sort of artwork. And typically that's what I will do is I'll kind of ask myself, what do I actually need in order for this to happen? And I kind of work backwards. Like, I'm like, well, I have to actually have the equipment to record it. I have to actually be able to upload it to a distribution site. So obviously that's how I found out about those things, through that couple I messaged. I was like, okay, I have to have some sort of artwork. So that's when I went to Fiverr. And basically from there, I was good to go. It was just like, okay, I just need to record the podcast episodes and then I need to edit them and then upload them through Podbean, which is the website that I decided to go through to upload my podcast. So that might seem really short and simple, but that is honestly the step-by-step process that I go through in my mind when it comes to anything I'm trying to pursue or see become a reality, like a goal or a dream. It was the same exact thing with learning to mix music. Honestly, I didn't have thousands of dollars to invest in taking courses to learn to produce and mix music. Some people do, and that's awesome. I personally did not have that type of money to do that. But money is not a limitation. I refuse to believe that. And so I was like, okay, how can I still work towards, learning to produce and mix music in a way that isn't going to break the bank for me? And so I asked myself the same question. I was like, who do I know around me that is better at producing and mixing music than me? And I'm in a couple music mentorship groups. So at the time, I was thinking of people in one of the music mentorship groups specifically that I'm in, called the Billboard 500 Club. I was thinking, who do I know in this group that is better at producing and mixing music than me? And there were a few different people that I had heard some of their tracks in the group. And I was like, man, their tracks are really professional. They're winning contests in the group because of the quality of their tracks. So I reached out to those people specifically and said, hey, can I take like an hour Zoom lesson from you over Zoom where I ask you some questions about mixing and you pull up your DAW and you show me how to do these things? And I asked those people how much they would charge for an hour lesson. And all of them actually said they would each charge me $50 for an hour lesson. And so I was like, yes, this is perfect. This is within my budget. Instead of spending thousands of dollars on a production and mixing course, I can spend $50 to hire this person to show me how to mix and to answer my specific questions that I have. So you can kind of see that I used a very similar process where the first thing I asked myself was, who do I know who's better at this than I am? And then I reached out to those people and I asked them for help. And I asked them very specific questions of things I needed to know or needed to learn. And they gave me specific answers that I then took away from those lessons and applied practically. So even if you feel like there are certain things limiting you, like maybe you feel like you don't have enough money to invest in learning certain things, that's not necessarily true. I would encourage you to ask yourself, okay, what is a way that I can work around that to learn this in a way that it fits into my budget? Some of those producers that I took mixing lessons from at that time 2 years ago will now tell you that they actually feel like I might be better at mixing than they are. And that's just because I practically applied everything that I learned and took from them over and over and over and over. And obviously, I work on music all the time. I'm constantly working on music. And so my ear is becoming more and more attuned to things. And the more you work on something, the more hours you put into it, the better you're going to get at it. But yeah, some of these producers will tell you that they feel like I'm actually better at mixing now than they are. And I didn't have thousands of dollars to invest in learning how to mix by taking courses. I just had $50 here and there that I was like, okay, instead of going out and eating somewhere a few times a month, I can put this $50 towards learning this skill. And that's what I did. And so I would encourage you, there is probably some sort of workaround for you to be able to learn the thing that you might need to learn in order to take a step towards the dream that you're wanting to pursue. Don't let things be a limitation for you. The only limitation that you have is your belief that you're limited. I'm going to say that again. The only limitation that you have is your belief that you're limited. There's always a workaround. So anyways, I know this one is kind of short and sweet today, but that's what I want you to do is I want you to specifically sit down, think about the dream that you are trying to pursue right now. And if you are not entirely sure how to get there, the first thing I want you to ask yourself is who do you know around you who is actually a pro at that thing? Who do you know who's already doing it that you can actually reach out to, maybe send a message, maybe call, and just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm thinking about pursuing this thing. I see that you have experience with this, and I was wondering if I could ask you some questions. Or I was wondering if I could hop on Zoom with you and take a Zoom lesson from you, and I'll pay you $50 for an hour. So that is your homework for this week, and I guarantee you, you will gain so much knowledge so fast by reaching out to those people rather than by trying to figure it out on your own. And honestly, if there's more than one person you could reach out to, I would encourage you to do that as well. It honestly really depends on what you're trying to do. Mixing music is such a multifaceted thing that I wanted to reach out to multiple people who did it to learn from them. But when it came to the podcast, I literally only reached out to one person in order to start this. So it honestly really just depends on what you're wanting to do. So with that being said, thank you all so much for listening. Do me a favor real quick. If you're a new listener or a returning visitor, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you're watching on YouTube, so that you can be notified about future videos, because I am kind of doing these in order in ways that will help people really take practical steps towards their dreams. If you want daily motivation and inspiration towards taking steps towards your goals and dreams, I also encourage you to follow my podcast on all social media platforms. The podcast is on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok under Dare to Dream Podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you have an amazing day, and I hope you tune in to the next episode. Na, 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 na.